In the history of crime, there are robbers who use guns, and there are geniuses who use a smile. But then, there was Frank Abagnale Jr. Imagine walking into a bank. You are 17 years old. You have no money, no degree, and no future. But the moment you walk in, the bank manager stands up, shakes your hand, and offers you a seat. Why? Because you are wearing a Pan Am pilot's uniform. You look like a hero between 1964 and 1969. Frank Abagnale didn't just rob banks. He fooled the entire world. He became a ghost that the FBI couldn't catch for 5 years. He successfully impersonated a pilot, a doctor, a lawyer, and a professor all before he was old enough to legally buy a drink in New York. Today, we aren't just telling a movie story. We are deconstructing the greatest social engineering masterclass in human history. We will look at the mechanics of his check fraud, the psychology of his disguises, and the high-stakes Gitánmos game with the FBI. Welcome to the ultimate deep dive into Catch Me If You Can. Every scam has a starting point. For Frank, it wasn't greeted with survival. Frank was born in 1948 in a wealthy part of New York. His father, Frank Sr., was his hero. His father taught him the most important lesson of his life. People only see what you show them. But in 1964, Frank's world collapsed. His parents decided to divorce. In a courtroom, a judge asked 16-year-old Frank to choose which parent he wanted to live with. Frank couldn't make that choice. He didn't say a word. He just turned around, walked out of the courtroom, and ran away. He had $200 in his pocket. He thought it would last forever. But in the cold streets of New York City, $200 disappears in days. Frank tried to get a job, but at 16, he was underpaid. He realized the world was unfair to kids, so he made his first move. He took his driver's license and a pen. He changed his birth year from 1948 to 1938. With one stroke of a pen, he became a 26-year-old man. He realized right then, the truth is whatever people believe it is. But he needed more than just an age. He needed a status. He needed a way to cash checks without the bank asking for ID. That's when he saw them at the Commodore Hotel in New York. A group of pilots walking in like royalty. They didn't stand in lines. They didn't show IDs. They were trusted by default. Frank whispered to himself, "I'm going to be a pilot." This is where Frank Abagnale became a professional. To become a pilot, he didn't go to flight school. He went to a phone booth. He called Pan Am's headquarters, pretending to be a co-pilot who had lost his uniform at a hotel in another city. He spoke with such confidence and used technical jargon he had researched in the library. They fell for it. They told him where to go to pick up a new uniform, but a uniform without knowledge is a trap. Frank then posed as a high school student writing a report on Pan Am. He interviewed real pilots. He asked it, "Tim, how do you handle the deadheading process? What are the FAA codes for landing? How do the payroll checks look?" The pilots, proud of their jobs, told him everything. They gave him the keys to the kingdom. Within weeks, Frank was deadheading, flying for free in the cockpit jump seat of other airlines. He traveled over 1 million miles, staying in the world's best hotels, all billed to Pan Am. But the real heist was happening in his hotel room every night. He was paper hanging, printing fake checks, and he had found a loophole in the banking system that made him a millionaire. To understand how Frank Abagnale became a multi-millionaire, you have to understand how the world worked before computers. In the 1960s, banking was a slow, manual game of paper and trust. Frank wasn't just printing fake checks. He was a financial architect. He discovered a fatal flaw in the system called the magnetic ink character recognition, or MICR. Those little numbers at the bottom of your check, they tell the bank where that check needs to go for processing. Frank bought a professional-grade Heidelberg printing press. He started printing his own Pan Am payroll checks, but he did something brilliant. If he was cashing a check in New York, he would print a routing number that belonged to a bank branch in Miami or San Francisco. Why? Because the banking system back then relied on the physical movement of paper. The New York bank would send the check to the regional clearinghouse, which would then see the routing number and mail it to California. This created what Frank called the float. For 10 to 14 days, that check was in transit. During those 2 weeks, the New York bank had already given Frank the cash, thinking the check was good. By the time the bank in California received the check and realized it was a fake, Frank had already checked out of his hotel, moved to a new city, and changed his name. He was essentially outrunning the speed of the US Postal Service. He wasn't just stealing money, He was stealing time. By 1966, the FBI was starting to notice a pattern of forged Pan Am checks. The heat was getting too high in the sky. Frank knew he had to disappear. But how do you hide when your face is on a wanted poster? You hide in plain sight. You change your skin. Frank moved to Georgia. On his apartment application, he casually wrote his occupation as pediatrician. He just wanted a quiet life. But his neighbor, who happened to be a real doctor, started talking to him. Soon, Frank was invited to visit the local hospital. Under normal circumstances, a 18-year-old would be terrified. But Frank had a superpower, the audacity of confidence. When the hospital needed a night supervisor for the pediatric wing, Frank took the job. He didn't have a medical degree. He didn't even know how to use a stethoscope. So, how did he survive a year in a hospital without killing anyone? He used the management technique. Whenever a nurse would run up to him with a medical emergency, Frank wouldn't panic. He would calmly look at the intern and say, "And what do you think we should do in this situation?" The intern, eager to prove himself, would explain the entire procedure. Frank would simply nod and say, "Exactly, get to it." He was a master of delegation. He realized that in any professional hierarchy, the person at the top doesn't need to know how to do the work, they just need to know how to manage the people who do. For nearly a year, Frank Abagnale Jr. ran a hospital wing, lived in a luxury apartment, and dated nurses all, while the FBI was looking for a pilot in the sky. While Frank was playing doctor in Georgia, a man in a gray suit was becoming obsessed with him. In the movie, his name is Carl Henry. In real life, his name was Joshi. Joshi was an old-school FBI agent. He was methodical, boring, and brilliant. He realized that this wasn't an ordinary criminal. This wasn't a bank robber with a gun who would eventually make a mistake in a shootout. This was an artist. She noticed that the Skywayman, as the press called Frank, wasn't just cashing checks. He was leaving a trail of luxury. Expensive pens, high-end hotel stationery, and a taste for the finer things. The most frustrating part for the FBI, Frank was actually calling them. He would call Joe Shea's office just to taunt him, or sometimes out of loneliness. You see, that is the curse of the con artist. You can have all the money in the world, but you can't tell anyone who you really are. Your entire life is a performance. Joshi realized that Frank's biggest weakness wasn't greed, it was his ego. He wanted someone to know how smart he was. And Joshi was the only person in the world who truly understood Frank's work. The hunter and the prey were starting to develop a strange, twisted respect for one another. Frank Abagnale's most audacious scam wasn't flying planes or running hospitals. It was the law. After fleeing Georgia, Frank moved to Louisiana. To everyone there, he was Robert Conrad, a Harvard law graduate. But here is the unbelievable truth. Unlike his other scams, Frank actually passed the Louisiana bar exam. He didn't forge the certificate. He sat in a room and took the test. It took him 3 tries, but he studied at 16 hours a day until he passed. For months, he worked in the state attorney general's office. A 19-year-old runaway was now prosecuting real criminals. But the FBI was closing in. Joshi had tracked the paper trail to Louisiana. Sensing the heat, Frank disappeared again, this time to Europe. In 1969, the game finally ended. Frank was living in a small town in France called Montricard. He thought he was safe, but an ex-girlfriend recognized his face on a wanted poster and alerted the authorities. The movie shows a dramatic standoff, but the reality was much darker. Frank was thrown into Perpignan, one of the most brutal prisons in France. He was kept in a tiny, dark cell with no light, no bed, and barely any food. He lost half his body weight. He was no longer the charming pilot. He was a broken man facing a lifetime of cold stone walls. After months of legal battles, he was extradited back to the United States. But Frank had one last trick up his sleeve. As the plane carrying Frank landed at JFK Airport, he did the unthinkable. In the movie, he escapes through the toilet. In real life, it was even more daring. Frank knew the mechanics of the Boeing 737. He managed to detach the toilet as sewage tank and crawled through the internal hull of the plane, jumping onto the tarmac while the plane was taxiing.